I wrote this piece this morning. Biden, Obama, Clinton, DNC, Wall Street, CIA machine cares nothing about workers, and comfy suburban boomers are complicit. Many comfy suburban Dems at a deep level are more wary of the rise of the lower working class than they are of Donald Trump and Republican rule. In politics, grubby populism seems to concern and worry them at least as much as it concerns and worries DNC insiders and their wealthy donors. The comfortable voters who typically vote in presidential primaries are suffering from an acute case of don't give a shit-itis when it comes to the plight of those who do the actual work in our society. Here's the bottom line. The only people who truly are concerned about another 4 years of Donald Trump are equally wary of what workers already have suffered as a result of the duopolistic pendulum swing of neoconservatism/neoliberalism over the last 40-plus years. This group is much smaller than it should be because the only people who understand this truth have somehow unplugged themselves from the narrative management of the corporate media. Even though they mostly are unwitting, comfortable suburban voters have been complicit in the destruction of the middle and lower working classes by allowing their consent to be manufactured by the corporate media wing of the oligarchy. The 1% would never have been able to maneuver themselves into their current sweet situation without taking the comfy suburban voters along for the ride. Therefore, unless and until comfortable voters can be persuaded to agree to help those lower down on the socioeconomic ladder, plutocrats will continue to call the shots and workers will continue to be treated as expendable sheep and cattle. How to break the vicious circle. The most vulnerable point in the vicious circle we find ourselves in is the information flow that continues to propagandize the comfortable voters who typically vote in presidential primaries. The only hope we have of breaking the circle is to find ways to weaken the stranglehold the corporate media have on all of us, but most particularly on the baby boomers who insist on voting for corporate bot candidates. So let's assume for a moment that if everyone in the world were to read and understand this article, the balance of power would suddenly shift because people would wake up, rise up, and work together to throw off the shackles of oppression. A tall order, to say the least. But even though this assumption is wildly optimistic, let's say it's true and that all we would need to do to change the world would be to get this word out around the blockade that currently is in place. In essence, I'm saying that it would be necessary to prevent the few owners who actively control and manage the current narrative from marginalizing and squeezing out opposing narratives such as this one. My bold assertion is that if a small number of good faith operators could hijack the dominant narrative, the narrative managers who currently control everything would be thwarted. Baby boomers could be re-educated or re-manipulated, but in new ways that would allow them to continue to thrive, but not by continuing to believe in the zero-sum thinking that has allowed them to flourish at the expense of those on the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. And lest you misunderstand, I'm not saying that boomers are evil. I am saying that they are complicit and willfully ignorant, but that's slightly different. The good in people will overcome the bad if they prod themselves out of apathy, or if others do the prodding, and keep fighting the good fight internally. That's where the few, the proud, the narrative unspinners come into the picture. These are the good guys. You can tell because they seek liberation as opposed to domination. Because the collective, that's all of us, through apathy has allowed the 1% to dominate the way that the narrative has been managed, the worst in baby boomers has come to the fore. If we unspinners of the narrative can break the vicious circle at the most vulnerable place, narrative management, then we can help the boomers fight the internal values fight that could lead them out of their chronic state of not give a shit-itis. And while the internet still retains at least a modicum of democracy, I believe that the way out of this morass is to share vigorously on social media. And by vigorously, I mean something like the methods described in the following video. Facebook Groups 101, Unspinning the Corporate Narrative. When you know you've posted enough truth to comfy suburban boomers and are waiting to be taken to Facebook jail. The corporate entities who own the social media companies, newspapers, television, op-ed writers, and the like are loath to let a small army of narrative unspinners muscle in on their territory. Here's proof of that. Betsy Morris of the Wall Street Journal. Members of Sanders' online army ready to fight on. Betsy Morris of the Wall Street Journal apparently is frightened of our small army. She brands us as unpatriotic because we dare to use tactics that might amplify our voices to a volume level that could compete with hers and the other professional narrative managers. Corporate pundits are quick to decry our army of unspinners as uncivil and impolite when we dare to talk back on social media to our masters and their paid tools. Victor Tiffany, founder of Revolt Against Plutocracy and co-founder of the Bernie or Bust movement, is given the following treatment by Morris. Since Mr. Sanders said he is remaining in the race, Mr. Tiffany has doubled down on that campaign, questioning Mr. Biden's ability to defeat President Trump. Mr. Tiffany is trying to get Mr. Sanders' supporters to pledge not to back Mr. Biden if he is the nominee and instead to vote for a third-party candidate. The morning after the Michigan primary, memes from Mr. Tiffany's network such as "I'm staying home unless the nominee is Bernie" and "Bernie or else" flooded Twitter. His email list of 53,000 supporters, he says, includes those who have pledged, some as far back as the 2016 race, to shun the Democratic nominee if it isn't Mr. Sanders. A spokesman for the Sanders campaign declined to comment for this article. Mr. Sanders has said he would work to get the Democratic nominee elected even if he loses. I'm proud to say that I'm also mentioned in this article. Mr. Tiffany and some of his collaborators, including Millersville University music professor Alan Howell, have two principal adversaries: supporters of rival campaigns and efforts by social media companies to curb their kind of orchestrated campaign efforts. Mr. Howell recently posted a tutorial on YouTube titled Facebook Guerrilla Tactics 101. In it, he provides a list of more than 600 pro-Bernie groups and advises joining as many as possible, but not more than 50 a day, he warns, saying that's a red flag to Facebook. Such steps are designed to avoid having Facebook suspend an account, something he and Mr. Tiffany call being put in Facebook jail. I believe that Morris's reaction is a good indication that the narrative unspinners are on the right track. This is affirmation that good people need to keep fighting against corporate domination and that bit by bit, regular people may be able to unrig the game. And if you are reading this article, you are a candidate for the type of position, narrative unspinner, that society desperately needs at the moment. And the final point, democracy without vigilance cannot stand. Evil will always be waiting to creep back into the garden. Unless we are willing to pay attention and pull the weeds out when they are small, we and future generations again will be faced with horrendous odds. The neoliberalism that we have allowed to flourish over the last 40+ years can be eradicated now only with supreme effort. Once we defeat it, and many voices from the past echo this message, we must never allow it to grow again.
Get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Come get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Go get on board the Bernie or Bust train.
The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.